everyone. So we are QSPACE. First of all, I'd like to thank Van Alen and Stephen for inviting us here today. So QSPACE is a queer architecture research and design collaborative. We define ourselves as mixing queer theory, social justice, and design practice. QSPACE produces research and outputs on topics like gender-inclusive bathroom design, LGBTQ homeless and housing, and queer histories in architecture. Currently, we are designing gender-neutral bathrooms and to create more inclusive spaces. Our idea is to empower architects to become better advocates for inclusive design.
Hey, again, thank you to Van Alen for hosting this important conversation, and definitely one of the most unique public spaces in New York, which has a fun history with the current today's conversation of sex. And cue the junior high students leaving. No. It's good.
I love my job. I gotta get
So some background. New York City has served as an essential space for LGBTQ history, from the Stonewall riots to being a sanctuary for LGBT people from all around the world. And just to say, when we talk about public space, or we talk about gender and sexuality in the built environment, we're really talking about who has access to public space, and we're really asking who's allowed to be visible in public space. Before we get to this conversation, I want to quickly address some terminology that might be helpful to this conversation, differentiating between biological sex, gender, and sexuality. Biological sex is the physical sex characteristics one is born with, such as genitals, body shape, and voice pitch. Sorry, I said genitals. I hope that's okay. Gender identity is how one mentally defines their gender. Gender expression is how one presents their gender through actions, dress, and demeanor. And sexuality is who one is sexually and or romantically attracted to. Sometimes those things seem obvious, but it's nice if we all could kind of use the same terms. And I just want to say a huge thank you for Avi Rajagopal from Metropolis Magazine and Joanna Klappenberg from Architizer for leading these conversations today.
Thank you so much for being part of this conversation.
Yes, it is.
And thanks to all of you for being here as well.
Okay.
So let's start by introducing ourselves. I'm your moderator for the first two conversations, Avi Rajagopal. I'm a senior editor at Metropolis Magazine. And my preferred gender pronouns are he and him, so masculine pronouns. As you introduce yourselves, I would ask you to just tell the audience what gender pronouns you prefer, because, sometimes what we like to be called and what people assume we want to be called are not the same thing. So let's just make clear what we'd like to be called, and then I will refer to you that way for the rest of our conversation.
Cool.
So do you want to start first?
Well, I guess the ladies start first, and let me be a gentleman.
So my name is Alen. I am originally from Birmingham, Alabama, but I live in Brooklyn now. And what all do you want to know about me? I'm an entrepreneur. I run my own business, jewelry design, and I'm a wellness coach for natural wellness.
Great.
My preferred pronouns would be she and her.
Great. Welcome.
Thank you.
My name is Herbert. You can call me Herbert. I work for the Times Square Alliance as sanitation assistant supervisor. I am an author of a book called Standing Tall in Times Square, and I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York.
Wonderful. And what gender pronouns do you usually go by?
Oh, he and him.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. So can you tell me, do you guys think about gender issues in any way in your everyday life? Like, does it come up for you?
I mean, yes, it does. I mean, because you have got people from different nationalities, different agendas, and so that definitely is a conversation that comes up every day.
Mm-hmm. And what about for you, Aaron?
I would say as a female entrepreneur, it definitely comes up a lot. So I've been a retail sales manager for years, and I stepped down from that to run my own business. And part of the reason I did that was because I wanted to take control of my own life and be able to make as much money as I could make for myself rather than trying to gain equality. I feel like it's very important for me to be doing something that I can control.
Right. I'm actually going to start by, because we had an interesting gender moment right here for a second. So I wanted to ask you, why did you decide to let her go first?
I'm a gentleman, and in society, we should let the ladies go first, be a gentleman, so we can exercise that, that self-determination of being a gentleman and let the ladies go first.
And do you expect that usually?
Part of being from Birmingham, Alabama, is that I am totally fine with that, and I grew up with that. My father is a gentleman, and I'm not the kind of person that gets frustrated if someone holds the door for me. However, I would hold the door for someone else, be they male or female, because I think that we should all be polite.
Absolutely.
Does the word feminism mean anything to you?
I mean, again, self-expression is a beautiful thing. And if that's your desire to become whatever it is that's going to make you happy, to make you smile, by all means. If you smile, I smile. You know what I mean? So if that's who you are, then be it. Let it be it.
Do you call yourself a feminist?
If I were to give myself a label, it would probably be post-feminist.
Interesting.
So we can delve into that if you want.
Let us delve.
Okay. I've find being of the generation that I am, I have some problems with the feminist movement because it has now meant that I have to go out and get a job. I don't really have as much of an option of being a stay-at-home mom, which is what I always wanted to be as a kid. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. I always wanted to have children, but I found even after I got married, we both had to work. And I don't really have an issue with that, but it would be nice to have the choice. And I am now running my own business because I prefer to work for myself, and that actually will allow me to have a child if I want and be able to take care of it in a way where I still have a connection to my children without having to send them away for someone else to take care of them. So I'm an entrepreneur partly to put that option back in my life.
Right. That's so interesting. I mean, I think it's like, what you were saying. It's about, finding the best way to express yourself, finding the best way to express yourself, with whatever space you have. And sometimes we have to create that space for ourselves. Right. Yeah. Not speaking about gender or sexuality in particular, but just in general, do you feel like you face any kind of discrimination in your lives? Either of you. And would you be willing to talk about it?
I mean, of course. I mean, as being a young black man in America now, and how society treat the minority group it need to be discussed. That conversation definitely need to be discussed, and especially when you're talking about the criminal justice system and how they relate to poor people in general. And we have a problem with that. So yes, I think I, as a young black man in this society, is being treated differently as opposed to other ethnic groups.
And do you think young black people who are not men, whatever they may be, whether they're women, whether they're, whatever their gender identity, do you think they have it in any way better or worse, so to speak, than you? Do you think they face different kinds of discrimination than you do?
Well, I mean, it's not a black and white situation. It's about a poor thing. And when you're poor, yes, I think we all are put in a box and treated accordingly. And yes, it has some discriminatory aspect to it. So it is a difference, yes.
What do you think? Do you think income really trumps other forms of identity in that way?
I think that the income, being poor or being rich or being middle, because the middle class is disappearing. So I think that, yes, money inequality is a much bigger thing really than race at this point. I mean, they're all important, gender, race, but I think that we a lot of people find themselves poor that did not expect to be poor, and that is opening up a lot of doors to what does it mean to be privileged and what does it mean to have money. A lot of people of my generation, right, the poor millennials, we get labeled very negatively as well, but I graduated right as the stock market crashed. And so the job opportunities for me were basically nothing. What I'm doing today, I had no plan of doing, and have had to create a lot of things because of that. And so I think I feel a lot more kinship to people who struggle for money than I would have probably otherwise.
And do you feel like being a woman on the job market after that, the crash and the Great Recession, do you think that influenced your path in some way?
Well, I think that it might have been easier for me to get higher in the companies that I've worked for as a white male. I think that I still probably have a better chance than non-white men, because it's easier to promote a woman because they feel good about that. But I think really my personality of wanting to do things that I believe in and not just towing the line is what has made me not go up the ranks as far as I could. So I don't really think that has to do with gender or anything as much as it does with my firm belief system.
Do you? We'll talk our last question really is going to be about the cities you're from. So, from Birmingham and from New York, or Brooklyn in particular, if you want to talk about that. Do you think that there are certain places in the city that you gravitate to more than others? And does your gender have something to do with that? Like, do you like particular neighborhoods, particular parks because of your gender, do you think?
In New York versus or where I'm from?
Where you're from.
So I live in Brooklyn, and part of the reason I live in Brooklyn and not in Birmingham, Alabama, is because I don't really fit into the gentlewoman, thing that goes on down there. It's also a little bit too boring for me, but I think there are a lot of the people that I grew up with would be hanging out in Starbucks coffee shops and church events and places that I don't feel as comfortable. I would rather be in a local brewery, sort of a situation, and in a thing that is more less religious specific. And so part of the great thing about New York is that we all have an option. So I was at Cafe Wa last night listening to music, and you have people from everywhere, gender, all sorts of gender identities, racial, all that stuff, coming together to enjoy great music, and that's what I love about New York.
And what about you?
Well, in where I come from, I seen a big boom in the movement of the woman liberation, and where I came up, the men was the primary to take care of the family, the economics, and so on and so forth. And as opposed to today, the women of today became the men of yesterday because of their dominance now in society. You know what I mean? It seemed like, the men became the second class and the women became the primary class of society of today. So it is a difference.
Do you feel like men need to take some space back?
Yes, I think so. Absolutely.
Wonderful. And what about you? Do you feel like the space that you have in Brooklyn is a space that you value, or it's a hard-earned space, or do you feel like there is still something to be said for the gentlewoman life in Birmingham?
I think that, I like to toe a line. My business is actually it's a mixture of natural and elegant. And
Right.
and my mother was, graduated from cotillion, crosses her legs just right, sits up straight, is a sweetheart. And I always admire that about her and like to keep that elegance while still thinking that there could be more to being a woman than just being a gentlewoman.
Absolutely. Well, clearly being a man is tough and being a woman is tough. So nobody has it easy. Thank you so much. Thank you both for being part of this conversation. I enjoyed it so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so you guys were here. You know how it goes. Can you introduce yourself to our audience here? Just say something about yourselves, whatever you want to.
All right. Hi, my name is Alen. Grew up here in New York City, originally born in the Philippines, but came here as a young child. I identify myself as a he.
Okay,
What
nice
about
to
you,
meet you.
Gama?
My name is Gama. Well, actually, it's Gamaliel, but it's the short way to say it. I'm from Mexico City, so this is like my celebration for my birthday. So
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm 28. I just turned 28, and okay, so that's all.
Wonderful. We're gonna dive into some LGBTQ stuff now. Do you guys think about LGBT issues in your daily lives in any way? Does it concern you in some way? You don't need to, identify your, orientation or gender identity in any way. But if you want to, go ahead. But I'm just asking, does it intersect with your everyday life?
Yeah, well, I don't have any problem about identifying myself. I'm gay. I'm with my boyfriend, so he's with me in every time of my life. So it doesn't matter for me. I mean, I'm okay with that.
And what about
Yeah, it comes up a lot in my life. I am a heterosexual male, but I have a lot of good friends in the LGBT community. And as a manager in a retail company, a big part of my crew is also, in the LGBT community. And we try to promote within the company that I work for. We try to promote a community of understanding and of acceptance. So hearing the stories of my friends and the people that I work with and the people who work for me, the struggles that they go through, it is a constant, thing that's always on my mind. I don't know, not necessarily every day, but it's quite often. Yeah.
Since you're from here, from the United States, and you are not, maybe we can talk about the differences in your experiences. Do you know any LGBT people who are, immigrants here, who are not from here? Since, you do have so many friends, have you heard anything?
I do have a few that have immigrated from different parts, from Latin America, from Asia as well. I've heard stories that they've gone through as well in their countries, as well as, the struggles that they face here, especially in New York City. I believe that New York City is a melting pot, but there's still a lot of struggles within the New York metro community for the LGBT community.
And I don't know how long you've been in New York City now, but what's it like being gay in Mexico City?
Okay, well, I believe that being gay in Mexico City is like starting from the bottom. I mean, it's not like here, like they get accepted in every way. I mean, that you see the gay flag in every building. I mean, it's a starting, but well, it's very different because it's like you can hold your partner hands and it's like, it's okay. I mean, there is anything interesting in that. And when you go to Mexico City, it's like everyone is looking at you like, oh, wow, it's like you are giving a show, It's very different. But, well, I like being here because I like people is like, I don't know, they watch us like everyone else. I mean, anything is different from here,
And are there areas in Mexico City that you feel more at ease? And maybe you can tell us why?
Well, we live in the Mexico City, I mean, the capital. So It's a huge city, so if you go to the frontier, it's like there are people that are gay have more difficult, more, sorry, more difficult uh, lives because a lot of people think that you have to straightly marry a girl or a man depending on your sex. So if you live in the city, it's like I said before, it's starting to grow the feeling, the respect for gay people, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and for you in the city, I mean, regardless of, we're talking about sexual orientation, but regardless of that, are there places in the city that draw you more, that you feel more at home in? And can you tell us why?
Well, I'm currently in Brooklyn, and as I also have a background as an artist, so that's why I love Brooklyn. A big part of that is because of the creative community that I find in that borough. But also, I tend to go to places where it's diverse in so many things, in culture. You mentioned earlier, diversity in income, men, women, everybody, those who define themselves as other. I like to be in those areas where the diversity does flourish. That is not, there's no segregation. And there are pockets, there are neighborhoods in and around New York City. It's still very tight-knit communities of one type of, person, one type of community. There's nothing bad about those communities, but I tend to not be in those communities unless I have a friend specifically in that community. Then I'll go there. So I tend to go search for those places where everybody is kind of just there to be human, because we are just one human race, right?
Yeah. Um, do you think LGBTQ issues need to be discussed more in the media or less than they are now?
Absolutely. I really believe it does, as well as all the issues that are out there currently. I know we've run the gamut of it, this past year after the elections, and everything is out on the table, which is great, and I think the only way for us as a community of people to progress is to talk about it, I think it's fortunate that everything is out in the open now and that we can talk about it. A lot of issues in the LGBT community and racism and all that, has been swept under the rug, and we all know it's there. But unfortunately, I'm guilty of it too. We close a blind eye because we just don't want to deal with it. But now it's all out in the open. Let's talk about it. Let's get it out in the media. Let's talk about both sides. Let's see what we can do. It's all about the communication, at the personal level from one-to-one with, my friends, my family, individually, and then as a community, and then in the larger community, politics, government, and all that.
What about you, Kama? What would you like seen discussed in the media?
Well, I believe the same. I believe that if you want to, it's like any relationship, It's like communication. If you don't talk about it, it's like always hiding things. And you probably want to get to know more of the people that you are living with. And probably that person is just afraid to tell you what he is or she is thinking about. And they are like, no, you cannot talk about that because then it's going to break a relationship. But probably that person will just trust or let you live the way you are. You can, the more you know about the topic, the better you understand the people you are with. Yeah?
Yeah, and from what you're saying, that's also true of public space, right? Like the more you see people, the better it is. I'm just curious, have you guys ever been in a pride parade or seen a pride parade? Have you ever witnessed it or participated?
Yeah, I have. I have been in Pride at Mexico City, but it's like a festival. I honestly don't think that they really show how the LGBT people are, because they are like more like a show, you know? I mean, you can dress like a really man or really woman without being like very character. I mean, like a cartoon. I mean, you can be normal, but yeah, I have been there.
But that's very interesting. Why do you think then? Why do you think people find it important to do that? What do you think they're thinking?
Well, I think they want to show how how they think, but more like, come on, everyone, look at me. It's more like that way. It's more like they want to get seen, like instead of like how they feel, you know. It's more like I want you to look at me for what I have, like, you know, fit bodies like that, instead of more like how we think. This is what I can see.
As a straight person, is that how you see LGBT pride parades?
No, I don't. I think a part of it is, yeah, it's kind of this show, I'm here, which I think is important, because, there's not a lot of opportunities out there for the LGBT community to really show themselves to the rest of the world. I've been to some pride parades here in Manhattan, out in Queens as well. I grew up in Queens. In Jackson Heights is a big pride parade there every year. And I've been to those in solidarity for, people that I've known. Yeah. But the experience I've had, there's not a lot of politics in it. And I wish that there was more, is, having a voice on what the issues are and getting those issues out there to open up the conversations.
Maybe that's the sense that you're missing from those celebrations as well.
Yeah, well, probably I don't know if you have been there in Mexico City, but this is what I have seen there. I mean, I have been in the prides here, but probably it's different. But there is more like what I have seen, what I'm saying.
Well,
yeah.
Thank you so much, both of you, for
Yeah,
joining
you're
us. I
welcome.
really,
Right,
really
thank you.
appreciate it, and I learned a
Thank
lot.
you.
Thank you.
Hey everyone. So, as Steven said, my name is Joanna. I'm going to state my preferred gender pronoun, which is she and her. And I'd love for you guys to just briefly introduce yourself, say where you're from, and your preferred gender pronoun if you prefer.
Okay. My name is Gloria Samuel. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, and I am married and I'm straight.
My name's Jared. I don't really live anywhere right now. I just quit my job and I've been traveling, couch surfing. But I spent 5 years living and working in Brooklyn and working in Manhattan. So kind of familiar with the area here.
Great. I want to just start off with a kind of broad question. What does gender mean to either of you?
Wow, that's a pretty deep question for me because I work in a male-dominated industry, and so gender is always present for me as far as what I see day to day, how I'm always addressed, and questions that I get asked about working in a male-dominated industry. So it defines who I am. It allows me to be who I need to be day to day.
What about you?
Yeah, that is a deep question. I guess, I don't really think about it too much, which is probably a privilege, and I have to remind myself of that. Like, I don't feel like I've been pressured into different situations because of my gender, because of my experiences and where I grew up. But as someone who tries to stay in touch with the news and what's going on in world politics, I definitely think about the things that are going on and realize that there are too many issues to be dealing with right now, and that it's an amazing time to be alive, where we have a great platform to speak about things and to make even greater strides towards human equality.
Do you feel like you have an open platform to speak your mind, whether it be in the workplace or in your personal or public life, about your gender and gender inequality?
For the most part, yes. I mean, there are some instances, again, like I said, working in a male-dominated industry where I may feel like I don't have as large of a voice, or I'm questioned about whether I have the capability. But obviously, my ability to perform does outshadow any in any way someone may feel.
And what do you feel are some instances that make you think about gender or consider your gender?
Well, back when I was working, I had a female boss, and she brought to my attention how I wasn't consciously aware of things that I could do or say that she would perceive as, gender bias. And it's really important to know, the things that we say, the message sent is not always the message received, and to be more aware of that. Maybe because of just how I was raised and brought up, I'll say certain things, and I don't mean to say them and to be taken and construed that way, but they can be, and to be very aware of the way I present information.
Do either of you feel that? Oh, did you want to say something?
I was just going to add that I was at a conference just last week, and it was a women in construction conference, and someone at the table brought up or made a statement that they worked for a female boss and had a different experience, and it made me think about, I've actually never had a female boss, never thought about it before until just last week, and I've been in the industry for 16 years, so it's very different.
Yeah, and it's crazy how we kind of just, we make assumptions about what our, who our leaders are in our companies, and who we recognize as people who are, on top of a hierarchy in the workplace.
Yeah.
Do you think that there should be more of a structured conversation surrounding gender and gender inclusion within the workplace?
Absolutely, especially being in an industry where there's not many of us.
Yeah.
So we do have a lot of those conversations. My company makes a concerted effort to try to employ more women and minorities, but it's challenging, and for many different reasons, which I won't elaborate on. But yes, absolutely, it should be a conversation that should be had.
I'd love to bring up, because both of you cited instances in being confronted with issues surrounding your gender or other people's gender in the workplace. I'm wondering if there have been other scenarios outside of the workplace, maybe with friends or with family, where you've also had to confront issues surrounding gender.
Off the top of my head, I can't think of any specific instance.
So funny thing for me, I have 2 boys, and obviously a husband, so I'm a home full of men. And when I talk to friends who have girls, just the difference in how we treat our boys or our males versus our females, and just in expectations of what they're allowed to do, even as far as dating, as far as being able to travel by themselves, those types of things that we create them as parents sometimes, and really separate what you're able to do versus what your daughters are able to do versus what your sons are able to do.
Interesting. I guess I'm just wondering, is it important maybe that, I don't know, do you find yourself looking outside of that family unit to kind of look for counsel on maybe how to raise your sons and being sort of conscious individuals? Like, are you seeking advice from your friends with daughters? Is that sort of an everyday conversation or an everyday concern?
You can take it?
No kids.
Okay.
You don't.
Well, so yes, I, as a friend, or relying on my friends, we just talk about raising children in general. And so any advice that they can give me to have an outlook on maybe who my son is dating, because they're not a daughter to me, but there's obviously things that should matter, I think, as a mother of a son. And so hearing that feedback is important and has been helpful.
Did you have sisters or siblings growing up?
I have an older brother.
Older brother.
Yeah.
Just in your experience growing up with people of other genders, do you feel like there was a double standard maybe placed on what you were allowed to do as a male growing up, as opposed to what women or other people with different gender identities could do?
Yeah, I feel that's something that, as I've grown older, moved out of my little bubble from California, coming to New York, definitely have experienced that more and have had a lot more enriching conversations with people, with women, LGBTQ, different races, everyone, and it is eye-opening to see that, the struggle is real, and that, from my perspective, I had that white privilege thing going on, and I think it's a very real thing in the world today, and it's a shame that it's that way. And I'm always trying to think, what can I do to be better? And for me, it's listening and having conversations. So when I've traveled, when I've lived here, always just trying to expose myself to new perspectives and trying to understand where they're coming from. So yeah, like I feel like I've had a lot of enriching conversations with some amazing people over the years that will reveal their types of struggles.
Love to just bring the conversation back to space a little bit, so you guys and place and location. You said you're from Cincinnati.
Yes.
Are you living here now, or
No.
you're still living in Cincinnati?
Actually, my oldest son is in college in Philadelphia, and so we normally visit New York while we're here.
Great. And you said you've been moving around, but have lived in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I lived in Brooklyn for 5 years, but I spent the last almost 2 traveling, living out of a backpack, and yeah.
Got it. So I'm just wondering if you perceived any differences, both in the way that you see other people treated based upon their gender expression, or just even the way that you've been treated, both being at home and traveling.
Yes. So New York is obviously very different from Cincinnati. Very busy, even in just how people interact with one another. Cincinnati is a very conservative city, as most would know it. But at the same time, I can go anywhere, and generally someone may speak to me as a stranger. I don't find that so much here in New York, and so that is very different.
What do you think?
About
If you perceive that people are treated differently based upon their gender expression in or outside of New York, if you've noticed a difference.
I mean, yeah, like I spent a good amount of elementary school in Florida, where very conservative, it was a different experience. But then to go out to California and then be out here, I think that there's a lot more tolerance, definitely.
Would either of you say that sort of awareness, that location has an effect on how people are treated and registered based upon their gender? Was that ever a factor for you in deciding where to live and where to live and where to raise a family?
So I've always lived in Cincinnati, but my son, like I said, who's in college now, I've seen him grow in so many different ways than what he was able to do at home. And just as an example, he's participating in a summer program where he'll stay in a house with about 12 other people, strangers that he's never met, and they're basically Christian background, and they're giving back to the community. And that's not something that I would have ever sent my son to do, just because strangers are, not that I'm not welcome to or open to them, but it's just not been a space that I've been in before. And so, obviously the environment in Philadelphia welcomes that, has taught him how to live openly, and it's just very different back at home.
Yeah, I think when I look to settle down, all that, it's a huge part. Is I want to be somewhere that is enriching, has a positive-minded community, and I feel like you can find that in pockets all around the world. Obviously, the more people that you have, sometimes the easier it is to find those pockets. So it's an important thing to consider. Absolutely.
All right, so I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you guys so much for participating today.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you coming up here and talking to us.
All right,
Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm Carlotta, and my preferred gender pronouns, she and her.
My name is Harrison, and I go by he.
Great. And where are you both from?
I'm from Chicago originally, but I live here. I've lived here for a long time.
I'm from Salt Lake City, Utah, and I've lived in New York for the past 4 years.
I'd love to ask, are there any public spaces, and I guess maybe we could say specifically in New York, that make you guys consider your sexuality at all?
Hell's Kitchen. No, I mean, I think there's a lot of a gradient. So I think depending on where you are, I think entertainment scenes are a lot more flamboyant. But they indulge a lot more in allowing people to be out there sexually. I don't know if it's the alcohol or just the youthful population that New York seems to inhabit, but
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that too. As far as public spaces that, but I really can't think of any other scenario.
I'd be curious to know sort of where you two think that gender and sexuality intersect. Maybe if you consider that sexuality is maybe divergent from gender or not, and if that's something you're conscious of.
I mean, I think they definitely feed into each other pretty heavily. They're not going to be cordoned off into singular terms. But if I was to say sexuality, I don't know. I don't usually use the term gender for myself. I usually choose sexuality, and I think it ends up being mistermed in gender. So the way I perform is my sexuality. And I insist on saying sexuality in the workplace, like the way I act, the way I want to speak, the way I wear clothes. Whether or not I'm flamboyant or feminine, I usually say things so that it almost pushes back at people, so they're not trying to cordon me off. I work as an architect or in architecture, so it's a very male-dominated construction industry. For example, I dyed my hair blonde, and they sort of started taking me out of meetings with developers, or they wouldn't want me on site as much. And they sort of like came over that, and now it's not an issue. But it's a way that I like to push things back and forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, I would say I'm interested in making films, and I'm kind of conscious of that there aren't as many opportunities for women as there are for men. So I also think, it comes up in that sense of industry career.
I'm curious because both of you have cited working in male-dominated industries, and
I mean, I'd like to clarify.
Sure.
I'm male and white, and I wasn't openly. It's like a slow progression, so I'm able to like get through the door very easily, and I have a very good job, and I went to a very good school, and so I think my position is very, very at an advantage, even to the point where I'm able to be antagonistic in my job.
Interesting. I'm curious, would you say that also your race or how people perceive your race and maybe your class and education background, does that also, do you think, give you perhaps a privilege or less of a privilege in your working environment?
Yeah. Being woman of color and just being, female are definitely less advantage in work situations at times.
So both of you have sort of, expressed some discomfort that you found in your work environments in terms of the way that maybe you've been treated for your sexuality or your gender. I'm wondering how easy or difficult it was for you to introduce or maybe open a conversation surrounding that, and maybe what were some of your tactics to make someone understand your position.
I mean,
Well, I've definitely had confrontations with male coworkers that weren't treating me equally, were disrespectful, and it hasn't happened too much, but so I feel lucky in that sense because I'm sure for some women that's really common, and something they have to deal with every day. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I mean, I think the worst I've ever had it is I was asked why I didn't ask for permission before dyeing my hair in the same way as if I'd gotten a tattoo on my face, and my response was that they didn't ask any of the women in the office they could dye their hair, and it usually settles the matter. Especially in New York, where they want to think of themselves as somewhat progressive, so you just need to plant a little bit of discontent, and it solves itself.
Why do you think your superiors felt that they could exert that sort of control over your appearance in the workplace?
Because I represent the company. I mean, it's a fair gamble, but it's a little sad that they wanted to represent their company in that way. Like, yes, I represent the company, and it's fair that they want to represent something positive for their company. But it's just sad that they thought whitewashing, I don't want to say bleaching because that doesn't make sense right now.
Were there ever any sort of constraints placed upon the way that you presented yourself in the workplace?
Not really. I haven't had that type of situation, but I've had comments about, that were directed towards me when, say I was working late. Men would say things like, "Well, who's taking care of your kid?" And they don't say that to the other guys, So, that type of thing.
Yeah. So they were sort of expressing disappointment in your performance, maybe both in the workplace and at home.
Exactly.
So there's perceiving a double standard there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I guess that's time to wrap it up. So thank you guys so much for participating.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Great, yeah.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
Thanks.
Thank you so much to Joanna and Avi, Ryan and Lauren from QSPACE, Times Square Alliance, for participating in Crossroads Conversations. Again, I'm Steven with Van Alen Institute. We're a design nonprofit located in New York City. We do design competitions for public spaces like these red steps and public programs. We really believe in the power of public space to unleash levels of empathy and understanding between people that you wouldn't necessarily find online or standard forms of dialogue. So if you want to find out more, go to vanalen.org. And if you want to get involved with QSPACE, go to qspacearch.com. That's QSPACEARCH.com. We'll be back out here next Tuesday for an event focused on conversations on infrastructure. If you want to share hopes and dreams for our trains and bridges and tunnels, we'll see you back here. Thank you.